One of the ways that the U.S. is differentiated from other countries is its prison industrial complex. The United States is 5% of the world, but holds 25% of the world's prisoners. The U.S. prison system is home to over 2 million Americans, and the prison industrial complex is one of the fastest growing industries in the U.S. The largest private prison corporations, CoreCivic and GEO Group, collectively manage over half of the private prison contracts in the United States, with combined revenues of $3.5 billion as of 2015. Prisons in the United States serve various functions. One of the goals of prisons is to hopefully rehabilitate prisoners so that they can become a functioning member of society. One approach to achieving this end is by providing prisoners with opportunities to work. However, if we look at the prison labor system that exists today, it is evident that the system exists for the benefit of many more stakeholders than one might think.
I think prison labor is fundamentally embedded in prisons in the United States. The Pennsylvania and New York systems that develop at the birth of the modern prison in the U.S. were focused on labor as a way of giving penance towards God and reincorporating people into society. There were different strategies for labor, but both of these were fundamentally rooted around labor practices. And then what I think of as almost a separate institution of prisons in the South, around the prison farm, was also largely based around prison labor. But with that, then you factor in attitudes towards race and what were considered to be appropriate ways of putting black and white bodies to work.
You know, the country was founded upon, among a lot of ideas, the basic idea that property is the most fundamental right we have, both property in our bodies, but our capacity to work, to earn, to make ourselves literally and figuratively. That is the original idea as to why we have government, and thus in matters of punishment, it is a fundamental concern or interest whether we can, for example, dispossess through a form of punishment, whether we can fine or sanction, whether we can coerce individuals into labor, whether we can require people to pay for their confinement. These are all technical questions that get to the heart of American political ideas. And so it is as fundamental as voting is, I think, to American ideas of incarceration.
To understand how prison labor has become as pervasive in American society as it is today, we must look back at how the system developed. Prison labor has its roots in slavery. After the abolition of slavery, a system of hiring out prisoners was introduced in order to continue the slavery tradition. Freed slaves were charged with not carrying out their sharecropping commitments or petty thievery, which were almost never proven, and were then hired out for cotton picking, working in mines, and building railroads. From 1870 until 1910, in the state of Georgia, 88% of hired out convicts were black. In Alabama, 93% of hired out miners were black. In Mississippi, a huge prison farm similar to the old slave plantations replaced the system of hiring out convicts.
Prisons legitimated the practices that were going on before. So the convict lease system starts right during Reconstruction. So it was a period where there was a lot of work to be done, and a lot of that work was done by convict labor. And it seemed to be a way of justifying, not based on race, but based on individual failure, right? Which really, in the end, it's about race. In the South, a lot of these practices changed when southern states were trying to bring in northern capital. And it looked bad when there were black bodies out working in chains on the side of the road or something. So a lot of those practices shifted so that the South looked a little more progressive and humane to northern eyes. And so then you have this relocation of labor from, instead of chain gang labor out in public, it went to places like Angola or prison farms where the bodies were hidden, but they're still doing work, grueling labor.
Thanks to prison labor, the United States is once again an attractive location for investment in work that was designed for third world labor markets. A company that operated an assembly plant in Mexico near the border closed down its operations there and relocated to San Quentin State Prison in California. Because prison labor is so cheap, federal and state governments can sell prison-made goods and services to private companies at rock-bottom prices, creating a labor market incentive for mass incarceration. Just take a look at how the federal government markets its prisoner workforce to the private sector. In marketing brochures, the Department of Justice touts its cost-effective labor pool and a workforce with native English and Spanish language skills. For companies that profit from prison labor, they don't have to worry about strikes or paying unemployment insurance, vacations, or comp time. All of their workers are full-time and never arrive late or are absent. Due to the oftentimes year-long waiting lists for these positions, the pool of labor to draw from is substantial. Companies can avoid outsourcing their customer service departments to an international company to save money because it's just as cheap to hire American prisoners to take calls. Businesses can reduce manufacturing costs while also proudly displaying a Made in America label. It provides businesses with a skilled workforce, low labor rates, and nationwide locations. Many scholars and advocates have equated prison labor to slavery due to the relationship between how much work a prisoner does and how much he actually gets paid for it, as well as the general lack of rights that prisoners have to protest their conditions.
I mean, it's pretty much the exploitation of labor. As I explained to you, the responsibility I had, with my job, the payment, in retrospect to the responsibility was completely out of whack. It didn't even match up. So, that in itself is injustice.
Slavery, of course, was complete ownership of people by others. That was abolished by the 13th Amendment, but there's an exception in the 13th Amendment that says for people who are duly convicted of a criminal offense. So in that sense, slavery has not ended. There are certain rights that people in prison have. Not many, not nearly enough, but there are some that I think make it so that they're not literally owned and have absolutely no rights or power in every respect, but they're very, very few. And so in my mind, it's not a stretch to use the slavery analogy.
In some ways, prison labor was worse for the workers than slavery was, because when a slave was owned by someone, they protected, to a degree, they protected their asset. When you could replace one body with another by locking somebody up for vagrancy or theft or looking at somebody funny or whatever, the human life was less valuable. So in some respects, it was much harder. And so in Louisiana, where most of my research is, there was a penitentiary in Baton Rouge, and that was for the white inmates who were deemed to be better suited for industrial labor. And the black inmates were sent out into the fields where they worked because there was an attitude that their bodies were better suited towards that type of field labor. And that attitude still persisted to a degree.
There are several key entities that are involved in the prison labor system. The prison labor system connects countless aspects of American society to the U.S. prison industrial complex, a facet of American life that we oftentimes try to hide. At least 37 states have legalized the contracting of prison labor by private corporations that mount their operations inside state prisons. The list of such companies contains some of the biggest names of U.S. corporate society. IBM, Boeing, Motorola, Microsoft, AT&T, Wireless, Dell, Nordstrom's, Revlon, and Target are just a few.
So I would imagine, as in most matters of corrections, but more specific to prison labor, you're going to have at least three parties. You're going to have the general public, from which we draw those who are incarcerated, but also their families, citizens who vote, etc., the people at large. You're going to have the government, whether it be the courts, Congress who legislates, but specifically in this case, corrections staff, those who manage facilities. And then, of course, and particularly in matters of labor, you're going to have private actors. You're going to have corporations that look to incarcerated peoples as a labor source, who might be looking to sell goods within prisons or draw from individuals who are incarcerated the money or labor or something like that. And so I think those are the three sort of general actors.
But typically prison officials, and then there will be a organization that is a part of the state that runs the shops where the labor takes place and products are made, and they profit from that labor because they can sell it at prices that are much higher than what they have to pay for it to be able to make these products. They're typically not competing on the open market, so since it's a state agency, they can only sell usually to either nonprofits or state organizations. So universities, state universities, public universities will actually, much of their dorm room furniture and all kinds of stuff, and then things that are outside highway signs or at rest stops, all kinds of the park furniture and highway signs and all kinds of things are often made in prison. And license plates actually are, there's sort of a joke about license plates being made in prison, but that's the truth. They typically are. I've seen the factory where all license plates in the state of Maryland are made, and every single one, from vanity plates and weird colored plates and so on, they're all made there by people who are incarcerated who are making a couple dollars a day, working basically in a factory.
CoreCivic and GEO are publicly traded stocks on the stock exchange, meaning that everyday Americans can be investing and benefiting from the companies that run prison labor programs in U.S. prisons. It is impossible to deny the significant economic opportunities that these companies are fulfilling by utilizing the prison labor system. Just between 1980 and 1994, profits went up from $392 million to $1.31 billion. However, the people who are actually completing this work are usually making around $1 a day. Most inmates across the country do skilled and unskilled labor, typically for less than $1 per hour. In some states, it's entirely unpaid. The work ranges from building office furniture to answering customer service calls to video production and farm work, sometimes without the guarantee of safe working conditions. About 17,000 inmates at federal prisons work at more than 50 government factories, farms, and call centers across the country, according to the latest annual report published by the DOJ, also known as Unicor.
Inside of prisons, it's something that's very common. People work. Everything that's done inside of a prison is typically done by people who are incarcerated there. So janitorial work, kitchen work, any type of cleaning. Sometimes more specialized things have outside providers that come in. But and then there's also products that are made in prisons. So a lot of times it can be furniture, license plates, clothing for guards and for the incarcerated people, and all kinds of different products that are made within prisons. Sometimes flags, even condoms, believe it or not. Or call centers. There are a lot of call centers in prisons, so it's a very common phenomenon that people work.
And most of the people they employ are lifers. Maybe maybe about 70% to 75% of the guys you're employing, if they're lifers, then they're never to come out of prison, how to actually help that guy transition. Once they're released, if the people you employ are deemed never to be released. If you move to another prison, you won't just automatically have a job. They try to go through the avenues to get another job in a different plant. They have wood shops, they have the print shop, they have car wrapping shops, so they wrap state vehicles, state trooper vehicles, police vehicles. And if you go to another prison, you're not guaranteed to get a job with them again, even though you spent maybe 5 or 10 years working for them. So what happened was there's a print shop in Maryland, Correctional Enterprises. So what I did there was we actually printed out a lot of the advertisements for different vendors like Maryland State Library. So if you notice, if you have those advertisements that may advertise it in the Monopoly game, we actually print those posters out. Also, we print pretty much all state material for courts, anything for the different entities and the agencies within Maryland. Human Resources, Department of Human Resources, the Department of Housing and Community Development, any of their paper material that they give out to the citizens, we pretty much print that through our shop.
It is important to highlight the fact that many individuals who have experienced prison labor, either directly or indirectly, argue that the process has some redeemable qualities as well. Correctional facilities argue that prison laborers earn real-life job skills while offsetting some of the costs of running a prison. Additionally, working in prison keeps prisoners feeling like they are still contributing to society. Formerly incarcerated people argue more progressive companies shouldn't fear working with prisons because people want those jobs.
Well, for many people, it gives them something to do. You have to understand that being in prison is so tedious and boring. There's just nowhere to go. But to be able to have a job, even for very little pay, people want that. They like the structure, they like the regularity, they like to feel like they're doing something. So I say, I'm going to work at 8 o'clock, I'm at work. That's a good feeling to people. So I think that there's a real positive to working in prisons. It's just the exploitation part that is unacceptable. So I think it really keeps coming back to how little they actually get paid and how much they're taken advantage of. That's the real problem.
Keeping a person occupied and productive while in prison is definitely important as in any job. It teaches skills, weight, or amount of responsibilities that I think should be imposed on anybody in prison. I think it can carry over. But however, when you're working for wages, it doesn't really give you any motivation.
Labor can be important in helping people define themselves in a situation when it's really hard to define yourself other than like a body and a number, and a convict and a target and things like this. But it depends on the job you're given. If the job you're given has nothing to do with what you did before or your skill set or something like that, it's not meaningful. But I think that if there's a way to give some consistency to careers of people in there, I think that would probably make things easier for the staff as well as the prisoners there themselves.
It is clear that the current system does not exist without significant challenges and impediments to the full realization of humanity and justice for the incarcerated individual. Reforms aimed at various elements of the prison labor system have been voiced by activists, academics, and incarcerated individuals alike.
I think bare minimum individuals should have access to meaningful work while incarcerated. They should not be obligated to work. So that means both that they are not just forced to work, as one would be in convict leasing or were they enslaved, nor should they be coerced into work indirectly by it being tied to reentry or chances at parole, right? They shouldn't be sort of nudged toward work. It should be a free and open chance or choice and made accessible to them. And then most radically, I think, and we've seen this in recent strikes partially, that there should be labor rights for those who are incarcerated, that there should be, among other things, unionization rights.
If you're going to be released from working in prison to work on in society, it should be a more effective means of actually not just having transferable skills, but actually transfer people into open employment upon release. Better documentation that's reputed. I think if you work for a state facility, you should be able to put that on your resume and not look and not be frowned upon. State should do a better job with being references for guys, saying how you worked, what you did, official certificates or certifications. And you get a certification program that's recognized by the state licensing board for some of the work that's being done.
So I think some resources towards adapting the jobs would be good, and then I think that paying somewhat more fair wages would help the problem of poverty traps that people get into in prisons. And instead, we're looking at, we as a country are looking at prisons and jails as being opportunities for businesses to come in and make money off of fees for families communicating or transferring money, or talking on the phone, sending emails and stuff. Video conferencing, all of this stuff. We shouldn't be making money off of people because we're taking money from them, and much more so their families. And so I think thinking about what's fair payment is a conversation we need to have, and to look more globally, not only at the person who's incarcerated, but the impact of their incarceration on their families and their communities. And if somebody can work, well, I'll put it this way. I've met so many people there who feel so terrible that they can't care for their families while they're locked up. And these are people who are going to be locked up for the rest of their lives. But if they can do something for their kids, or they could do something for their spouses or nephews or whatever, it makes them feel so good, so important.
Americans need to understand how the prison labor system has become so embedded in the institutions of American life, and how they too are connected to and benefiting from it. In a country where a significant portion of the population has interacted with the prison system to some extent, we must collectively be engaged with the elements of the system that are unjust. However, as this video has demonstrated, we must not blindly attack the entire prison labor system, and must evaluate the voices of those who are being directly impacted by the process themselves.
It, like a lot of matters of incarceration, presents people with a sort of double bind. On the one hand, most of us, whether we are incarcerated, arrested, etc., or free and on the outside, would not accept labor as a form of punishment. We associate hard labor with totalitarian regimes. We associate hard labor with slavery in the United States. So we would not accept that. At the same time, there is always within corrections, if you are incarcerated, a real concern for how you spend your time, or what you do with your time to earn economic capital, human capital, whether it have to do with you re-entering society, whether it have to do with you developing a flourishing, interesting individual life, whether it be developing new skills, anything. And so I think a lot of individuals, from what I understand, are caught between that double bind, the sort of philosophical, political theory problem where we would not have individuals coerced into work, and the very real need, the real desire to work, to learn skills, whether that be through mundane menial tasks, or whether that be through more advanced technical work and training. And that, like a lot of matters of correction, seems to come down as well to sort of questions of theory and practice, and what the best is, right? Whether, for example, working as you would in Maryland at Jessup, working stamping license plates is a viable form of self-development and work if you're paid 20 cents on the hour.
It's a matter of making that time that we're taking people out of society and away from their communities, and doing something positive so that they can come back stronger instead of weaker. And so I think labor has a role to play in there, but we got to look at prisons as ways of developing that and not creating opportunities for other people to make money in there.